Nobody's out really telling you about the crop losses, what's expected in the future. There's a handful of people, researchers like myself, and then also astrophysicists coming out saying, hey, wait a second. We have a serious problem here that we all need to start talking about. Not a peep in the mainstream media. If you do talk about it, you're a denier. You should be silenced. You shouldn't even have a voice in the media.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the Grand Solar Minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
Welcome back to Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne, creator of the Adapt 2030 channel on YouTube, because we need to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030, because what we see already with the losses in the Grand Solar Minimum for our global agriculture, we're going to have to start bringing things indoors. We're going to have to think of different solutions, different grow zones, different crops. And this is what I try to feature and talk about so we can get the discussion started, because it's going to be up to us as citizens talking to one another. The mainstream media is dropping the ball. The governments have left us on our own. Nobody's talking about these changes. So again, it comes back to people talking to people, finding solutions. This is why I do the program. This is why I spend my time every Friday with you, try to bring in you newest information to help you get ready to protect your families and yourself as we move into these massive changes with the economy, food pricing, and society. That's what it's all about. Like these things I've been talking about today with the crop losses, will I be able to share this in social media moving forward? Let's say 2021 comes. Do you think I'll still be able to share the same amount of information with you? Will they try to curtail this flow of information because it might be too spooky? It might scare people. It might make them pull their money out of the banks and get ready. What do you think? I'll leave that up to you because you have your own ideas of what you see across the social media landscape in terms of censorship and what type of information they're censoring and where the censorship is moving to. I'll give you a quick indicator here, at least as I've been told. The censorship machine is going to move into high gear as we enter the election season around 2020. Now, after that election is over, then what? What are they going to censor next? Coincidentally, at that time, we're coming into the harvest season of 2020. So the food price losses I'm talking about today are nothing in comparison to what's coming for the food spikes. Take a look through history in the futures market and see where you can find the highest prices. And then go back and see if you can match that with solar activity. Just go back to a regular solar activity chart. Just go back, like put in solar cycle, go solar cycles last 100 years. And take the commodities futures trading back to 1940s, 1950s, and then start to see if you can find some spikes in the solar activity with what you get in food price movements. And notice the trend. When we come into the 11-year solar cycle lows, solar minimum on the 11-year solar cycle, well, we start to see prices increasing because the weather not conducive. Something happens when our sun goes into low activity state. Our global agriculture gets affected. Now, on the 11-year cycle, it's a very small one season, maybe two, it's usually around 1 to 2 seasons. And then, boom, it jumps right back. And then we have stable growing weather once again. But bring it into a 400-year cycle, and we're talking about decade plus of disrupted global agriculture. Now, what's that going to do with prices? If we're already seeing this much movement and this quickly and people getting spooked this fast on just some floods in America, what's going to happen when it's happening everywhere?
And speaking of cycles, my new book with my co-author Bill Porter, Climate Revolution, a must-read for understanding our sun-driven climate. As we progress deeper into this new Eddy Grand Solar Minimum, weather extremes leading to global food scarcity and higher food prices are here now. This book describes the expected changes, how to survive and thrive during future challenging times, and also practical preparations. The entire book is interactive with over 250 links, so you can click and go out to the scientific aspect of what we're talking about with the repeating cycles in this Grand Solar Minimum. The science is explained so you understand the mechanisms. The solutions are there because we know we're going to face these exact same problems again that were faced in the Maunder Minimum, the Sporer Minimum, the Wolf Minimum. Find designs for building greenhouses, grow guides, beam soil techniques, as well as bioreactors to create your own growth hormones for the soil. Available now, the new Adapt 2030 Climate Revolution. The link's in the description box below.
So, take this in a microcosm and a macrocosm approach when you do look at this. Now, here's the thing. Australia just imported 600,000 tons. Now they're actually looking for another 400,000, so that'll bring it up to 1 million tons of imports. And why do I even talk about Australia? Well, it is, again, the poster child for crop losses based on solar activity. If you look back through history, you'll find that the southern part of Australia is heavily affected by solar cycles. There's a great forecaster out there. His name is Kevin Long, and you can find his information at, this is the address I want to give you here, thelongview.com.au. Now, he has free reports out there. And his name is Kevin Long. And he forecasts southeast regional crop production for Australia, and he's been doing it for the last 30 years. I had an interview with him. We spoke for a couple hours. It's in my playlist. If you go to Adapt 2030, you can find that long interview with charts, with images, all the links to his free types of PDFs and reports that you can get out there. This is last year when we did our interview, and he's like, David, we are going into a mega drought in Australia, and I tell you, in the next 1 to 2 years, Australia is going to turn into an importer, not an exporter. And I said, I kind of agree, because we look back in history, and what I'm finding is correlations between the Angkor Wat, the Angkor Society in Cambodia, and the floods in eastern Australia and Queensland. And some researcher found the correlation that you go into a massive drought in Angkor or Cambodian area, there'll be a massive drought up there, but then it'll be excessive rains in Queensland. But at the same time, you're going to get a huge drought down in southern Australia. So Kevin was telling me, all right, look for this massive drought to come, and it's going to last for 7 years. And I said, well, Kevin, that's a long time. What's going to happen with agriculture? And he says, it's going to go to zero. We won't grow anything. We'll have to import. And I said, all right, great. I agree that there's going to be massive changes. I didn't know it was going to happen in 1 year. I mean, these changes we're talking about, I thought they would unfurl over, 3 to 4 years. And by the time we got to these same times again, 2023, we would be where he was talking. We're here now. You know how far ahead of the schedule this thing is that's rolling out? These kind of massive crop losses weren't predicted for another couple years. So here we are, years ahead of schedule. Australia is now a massive importer of wheat. They used to export. Now, what they're growing this year is still adding into the total so they don't have to import as much. But according to Kevin Long's predictions, these next 7 years, it's going to be less and less and less rainfall. So whatever Australia was producing internally, so they only need to import 1 million tons of wheat, that's going to flip over the switch here. They're probably going to be importing 2-3 million tons by the end of this thing over the next 2 years, maybe 3. Now, that's going to be pulling from the greater market, but Australia used to be a massive supplier into the market. See, that's the turnover there. They used to produce like 12 million tons. Now they're down to not producing enough to even feed their own country, that they need to go out searching for imports. Now, South Africa is experiencing the same thing, but South Africa is purely politics. Take a look at why the crop losses are really happening down there. Now, we saw what happened in Zimbabwe when Mugabe removed all the white farmers out of there too. Their agricultural production almost went to zero. I couldn't believe that they actually removed everybody off the farms, and then they came begging to the UN for food help. That's ridiculous. Their corn production's down, natural drought. Their wheat production's horrific this year in South Africa. Most governments on the planet know that we're coming into some incredibly, never seen in 400 years, growing conditions. So it's going to be incredibly difficult. It's not going to be the same standard operating procedure that we normally get. It's going to be things are changing by the year. You're going to have to try to adjust using your sixth sense and your skill of being a farmer for 30 years. Smash it together and hope for the best. Point to notice also, the rest of the world's elected officials don't care about you either, because they would be warning you about the Grand Solar Minimum if they cared. The corporate media would be talking about this daily in the front page of every single newspaper if they cared. Nobody's out really telling you about the crop losses, what's expected in the future. There's a handful of people, researchers like myself, and then also astrophysicists coming out saying, hey, wait a second. We have a serious problem here that we all need to start talking about. But nope, nothing, not a peep in the mainstream media. If you do talk about it, you're a denier. We shouldn't even counterbalance you. We should have no debate whatsoever. It is no debate. The science is settled. How dare you deny or even talk about the sun driving the climate? And here we are in the first year of significant crop losses, and they're still kowtowing to the same interest and the same ridiculous non-participation in the conversation. South Africa used to be a major exporter for the rest of the African nations. Like, where did most African nations purchase their grains from? South Africa, because they were the breadbasket of Africa. Grain production this year coming out of the northern African countries, oh my gosh, all-time record production. So the rainfall is increasing where they're growing crops. And if you look, now here's a little homework project for you. Take a look at the Roman grain-growing belts in North Africa. And take a look where the Romans, during that time, 2,000 years ago, had wetter conditions. Notice where the same areas are starting to green right now to see where the grain production is increasing in Northern Africa. And you'll see why the Chinese have invested in there so heavily. You'll also see why the integrated EU Defense Force planning to send troops down there and occupy part of that under the EU friendly neighborhood policy. Why is everybody so suddenly interested in North Africa? There were so many famines down there. All we did was have fundraisers, rock concerts. It was like, throw some money at the problem, feel good. How many decades have we been sitting there watching those people starve to death in never-ending wars, and nobody's helping? Until now, suddenly, because the greening areas where they can grow crops are back. So, now we have such an interest in their well-being. Let us go give them medicine. Let's build roads for them now. Finally, hospitals and schools, ports, railways. Nice. They need it right now, 2019. Why did we wait 30, 40 years to go help? What's the deal now that everybody's down there? Right now, everybody's like, we need to help. Let's put people in there to help build the infrastructure. That's the same. They're military people, but we're going to help them build infrastructure. So the political maneuvering around the planet, it's all from the Grand Solar Minimum.
TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. And there's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at TrueLeafMarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
The people in South Africa should be demanding answers why their agricultural production has almost ceased. Why is the South African media not even talking about how did they go from a major exporter into trying to look for imports again? Now let's jump back down to Australia, because Australia and Tasmanian lamb prices have hit record highs due to drought and shipping delays. And, they put it finally at the end of the sentence here, shifting weather patterns. Now, what does a shifting weather pattern mean to you and me? Well, if you take a look at what's happened in South Africa with the Antarctic storm front surges everywhere, you'll start to see that there is a massive shift going in the southern hemisphere as well. The amount of Antarctic fronts rolling up that are going so far north now, it is unbelievable. But then they're coming back saying, oh, it's heating oceans. But yet the water temperatures all around the Antarctic have dropped. So for them to come out and say, it's heating oceans causing more snowfall makes no sense. It couldn't. The ocean temperatures are dropping in that part of the world. So again, part of their, coming out standard response, oh, it's heating oceans. You got to direct them back down to the Southern Oscillation and let them take a look at the water temperatures down there. The growing sea ice, or I should say off the Antarctic, and then the growing glaciers on Antarctica. Confirmed by NASA, ice sheets growing in Antarctica, sea ice increasing, and decreases in water temperatures around the Southern Hemisphere. Please do some research so you have a counter argument, because you already know how they're going to argue. You already know their default is heating oceans. But watch them look like a deer in the headlights when you mention exactly what I mentioned. If you were to get into a heated debate with a global warming proponent and they throw that at you because the reason for the increased snowfall across southern Australia and New Zealand, and you come at them with the Southern Oscillation and the increased glaciers and sea ice based on NASA measurements, they lost their argument. There's nothing for them to say. Once they have no more argument, that's when the mudslinging comes in. Like, you win the argument when they got to come back and swear at you or call you a denier or something. You won the argument. Just enough there to settle back and be like, knee on the ground, just like playing football in America, put the knee on the ground, run out the clock, just sit there because you already won. Don't even say, don't respond, just let them fester inside there. You got the argument. That was definitely expected in global warming, wasn't it? We would see the all-time coldest records ever broken across Australia and the United States and Europe and Tasmania and New Zealand and South Africa and Brazil and Canada. I could keep going on. But it was all predicted during global warming? Really? And again, they come back and they say, well, there's a high pressure system blocking in the ridge up there of super hot air that's pushing all this record cold temperature down. So actually, global warming is causing the record cold. You just didn't know it. And then I'll say, well, what was the width and the circumference of that high blocking pressure system? Do you know? And they'll go, no, I don't. And then I'll whip up like a 500 millibar temperature map and say, the thing was like 300 miles wide. You're telling me it displaced 10,000 miles of air? A little measly 300-mile patch of some warm anomaly that busted off and came up from the equator, displaced the entire northern hemisphere weather system. Got to get back into reality. That's like saying a marble displaced an entire building or something like this. I really do laugh at the absurdity of the arguments they try to present, because if you just go back in real science and bring up the 500 millibar charts when they start talking like this, put the science back in their argument. If they say it's displaced because of a blocking high, well, they should have at least enough sense, if they're going to go throwing that out to you as an excuse why record cold is pervading the planet, they should at least have the resource available for you, and you need to call them on it. Well, I want to see this blocking high. What resources do you use for the millibar anomaly charts that you're looking at and referencing? Where do you go? I want to see that. And they're going to look at you like a deer in the headlights. I mean, there are some who actually know where they're going and what they're doing. Some of these things just were not forecast for global warming. And if you ever watch that movie, An Inconvenient Truth, you're certainly going to remember the line in there, your children will never know what snow is. Do you remember that quote? Somehow it just magically disappeared off the internet. So you do need to go into the Wayback Machine and start saving screen grabs of things from this point forward. But everywhere you look, remember that was such a famous quote back when the movie came out. Everybody was quoting it, memes, quotes, everything. Everywhere you looked, if you went into like a simple one, Google image, which I don't really use Google for searching. I always use DuckDuckGo. But way back in the day when the search engines just started and you were looking for info, there were so many quotes about Al Gore saying, your children will never know what's snowing. We got to do. And now all that stuff has disappeared off the net magically. I wonder why. Children will never know what snow is except for the record snowfalls. Mammoth Mountain, extending the ski season into August after record snowiest ever. But nobody's asking a question why. Corporate media is silent on that. Why would you even talk about record snow and like extended snow seasons and global warming? And no, I won't kowtow and start calling it climate change, because I grew up global warming. And because all the predictions of all the heat didn't pan out, they tried to shift it to climate change. Oh, and by the way, if you hadn't gotten the memo, They're now shifting it to climate extremes. Guardian. And they even come out and said, well, it's not forbidden to use the words climate change anymore. You can come out, Guardian, climate change moves to climate extremes, new lexicon or new verbs, new words to use for describing the climate. So it's even interesting in the article, they say, we're not going to forbid you from using the words climate change. Now that comes right on borderline thought police right there. How can the Guardian really, with a straight face, write that? We're not going to forbid you from using the word climate change. We're going to forbid you from using the word global warming. We're going to forbid anybody from debating about the sun, but we're going to still let you use the word climate change just for now. It's going to change, though. You have to substitute. So they gave all these substitute words in there that you're supposed to substitute now as a reporter writing anything about the climate changing. Climate extremes, that's a new one. You can't use climate change anymore because it's not scary enough and it's not getting people enough into action.
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.